All right, welcome to your deep dive. You sent us some pretty wild material for this one.
Yeah, definitely intense.
Excerpts from a screenplay, huh?
That's right. It's called the EX.
The EX, okay. And it looks like it's all about, well, stalking and obsession and maybe even a serial killer.
All that and more. I mean, it really gets into the psychology of it all, you know? Like, the stalker isn't just a villain, right? They're like a full character with real motivations and stuff.
So that's our mission today, right?
Pretty much.
We've got to dissect these excerpts and try to figure out who the players are and what their deal is. See if we can make sense of this whole stalker profile thing.
Exactly. Unlock those motivations. It's going to be fascinating.
Okay, so ready to meet the cast?
Yeah, let's do it. So first up, we've got our protagonist, George Koupelos.
George Koupelos.
Yeah, an ex-hockey player, struggling writer, and kind of fixated on his ex, Cathy Hunt.
Well, he's already checking a few boxes on the potential stalker checklist.
Yeah, but remember, it's a screenplay, so, you know, twists and turns, things aren't always what they seem.
Right. Got to keep us guessing.
Exactly. And then we've got Fred Stetson.
Okay, Fred.
He seems to be George's friend, but there's this weird, unsettling vibe around him. Adds a whole other layer to the story.
Okay, interesting. So we've got our maybe stalker, and then we've got the friend who's maybe not so friendly.
Right. You could see it as a kind of dark reflection of George's desires, maybe.
Oh, that's going to be fun to unpack. And then, of course, there's Cathy, the woman at the center of all this.
Yeah, Cathy's character is really compelling. I mean, she's the target, right? Which automatically makes her vulnerable, but there's also this strength to her. Like, she's not going to be an easy victim.
This is a fighter. I like her already. Okay, so we've got this triangle forming. Any other characters we should keep an eye on?
Definitely. Emily Goldstick, she's George's psychiatrist, so she gives us this glimpse into his mind, you know?
Oh, yeah, that's key. Got to get in his head.
Absolutely. And then we've got Lieutenant Barrett, the cop who's investigating the stalking.
Okay, so he's bringing in the law enforcement perspective, the reality of these cases.
Exactly. He's seen it all, you know?
Right. All right, so we've met our players.
Time for some action.
Let's do it. So one of the first things that really jumps out, like really sets off the alarm bells, is this incident with the fake policeman at Cathy's door.
Yeah, that scene is chilling. I mean, it just shows how these stalkers, they exploit trust, vulnerability to get close to their victims.
Ugh, it's awful. Can you imagine, like, thinking the person who's supposed to protect you is actually a threat?
Exactly. It's a complete violation of your safe space.
Ugh, I'm getting chills just thinking about it. And to make matters worse, she gets followed while she's jogging in the park. So is this George? Is he really behind all of this, or is there someone else?
Well, that's where the screenplay throws in this whole copycat stalker idea.
Copycat stalker?
Yeah, like someone's imitating George's actions, you know, adding a whole other layer of mystery and danger, like stalker squared.
Okay, now that is scary. Double the danger, double the fear. So we've got to get into George's head. What is his deal? What's motivating him?
Well, there are these excerpts from George's sessions with his psychiatrist, Emily Goldstick, and they start to give us a few clues. Emily, she observes that George is basically living in the past. Like, he can't let go of his relationship with Cathy.
So he's stuck, huh?
Yeah, totally. Clinging to this idealized version of their time together, refusing to accept that it's over.
Yeah, it's like he's trapped in a memory, replaying it over and over again. I can't move on.
Exactly. And there's this really powerful analogy. He uses the bicycle analogy. He talks about building this bike as a kid from scraps, and then his father destroys it.
Wow, that's heavy.
Yeah, and it's like, even though it seems unrelated, it actually says a lot about George. Like this deep-seated need for control, for ownership.
Control and ownership. And that extends to his relationship with Cathy.
Right. It's not just about love, you know, it's deeper than that. This need to possess, to control, which, you know, is pretty common in the stalker behavior.
That is disturbing. Speaking of disturbing, what about Fred Stetson? Every time we learn something new about him, it's just more unsettling.
Yeah, he's a real piece of work.
So he's got this criminal past, right? A conviction for sexual assault. And there's even a scene where he tries to rape a woman, Chantel Black.
Ugh, that scene is hard to read. It just shows how far he's willing to go, you know? Like, he doesn't see people as individuals, they're just objects to him. Things to be used and manipulated.
And then there's that scene in Fred's apartment, right, where he has this whole shrine dedicated to Cathy.
Oh, yeah, and other potential victims, too. It's creepy, a clear sign of an unhealthy obsession. You know, it makes you think he doesn't just want Cathy, he wants to be George, too.
So he's not just obsessed with Cathy, he's obsessed with George's life, too. This is getting complicated. But then there's this other element, the stalker victim support group that Cathy goes to.
Yeah, that supporter group is interesting. It's like this little bit of light in all this darkness. It reminds us that stalking isn't just a plot device, you know? It's a real issue that affects so many people.
Absolutely. And they talk about different types of stalkers, intimate, delusional and vengeful. It makes you think about where George and Fred fit in.
Yeah, definitely. And they give some really practical advice like changing your locks, getting a deadbolt, documenting everything. Imagine being in Cathy's shoes, hearing all that.
It must be so overwhelming just trying to stay safe.
Yeah, and they talk about self-defense too, which is tricky, right? Because some people are all for it, but others say documentation and the legal system are the best way to go.
Right? It's a tough call. Like, what do you do when you're constantly looking over your shoulder?
Exactly. And Cathy's reaction to all this is really interesting. I mean, you see the fear, obviously, but there's this determination there too, this will to fight back.
Yeah, she's not giving up.
She's researching stalkers, trying to understand their tactics. She's even standing up to them in the support group. It's pretty inspiring, actually.
It's like she's refusing to be a victim. But then, of course, things escalate. There's that terrifying scene in her apartment. Someone breaks in and attacks her. She manages to call for help, but she's knocked unconscious.
That scene is so intense. It shows that no matter how careful you are, these things can still happen.
Yeah, it's really scary. And then the twist. The attacker is about to assault Cathy, but George bursts in and knocks him out.
Oh, yeah, that's a game changer.
But here's the catch. George is wearing a Fred Stetson mask.
Whoa! Now things are getting really confusing.
Right. So is George trying to protect Cathy, or is this some elaborate scheme? The mask just throws everything into question.
It's like the screenplay is messing with our heads, making us doubt everything we thought we knew.
Absolutely. And of course, we've got a good dose of mistaken identity. The cops arrive, and in all the confusion, they mistake George for Fred because of the mask.
Talk about bad timing.
Yeah, seriously. And then to make matters worse, Fred manages to escape from the ambulance on the way to the hospital. He's injured, but he's still out there.
This is getting out of control.
I know. And Cathy's left to deal with the trauma of all of this. She starts working with a social worker, Ann Baxter, who specializes in helping stalking victims.
Yeah, that's important. This kind of trauma, it can really mess you up.
Absolutely. But while Cathy's trying to heal, the investigation takes a turn. Lieutenant Barrett starts to think that maybe he's been focusing on the wrong guy.
Uh-oh.
He's starting to see all these things that point to George.
Like what?
Well, for one, all the stalking incidents happened near George's apartment.
That is suspicious.
And then Detective Angela Davis, who's working the case, she starts to suspect that the stalker might be using a realistic mask to hide their identity.
So anyone could be the stalker.
Exactly. The plot thickens. Remember that scene where George runs out of the pub to warn Cathy about Fred?
Yeah, I thought that was weird.
Well, it turns out he went straight to Fred's apartment. They got into a fight, and George ended up stabbing Fred and accidentally shooting him in the leg.
Whoa, hold on. This is insane.
I know, right? So George patches himself up, take off the Fred Stetson mask, and now his true face is revealed.
So he was the one who attacked Fred.
Looks like it. Later, Cathy goes to the pub looking for George. She's obviously shaken up and needs some answers.
Makes sense.
And of course, George uses this opportunity to manipulate her. He tells her all about Fred, how Fred is obsessed with him and wants to steal his life, including Cathy.
Classic manipulation, playing the victim.
Exactly. He tries to convince her to come back to him, saying he's the only one who can protect her. But Cathy sees through his act.
Good for her.
Yeah, she's not falling for his tricks anymore. But meanwhile, the police are still trying to track down both George and Fred.
So they're both suspects now.
Pretty much. And the screenplay introduces these two new cops. Detective Lisa Bocelli, who's assigned to watch Cathy's apartment, and rookie officer Jimmy Smart, who's supposed to be tailing Fred.
Okay, so we've got a seasoned detective and a rookie. What could go wrong?
Right, well, keeping tabs on their suspects turns out to be a lot harder than they thought. And then Cathy decides to go for a bike ride along this path by the river, a place that George knows really well.
Uh-oh. I don't like where this is going.
And guess who's watching her from afar?
Don't tell me, George.
Yep, George, still disguised as Fred,
He's relentless.
totally obsessed. Meanwhile, back at the police station, Lieutenant Barrett is feeling the pressure. He knows they need to catch this stalker before he strikes again.
The clock is ticking.
Exactly. So he calls a meeting with his team, Detective Davis, Sergeant Sampson, and this criminal psychologist, Fern King.
Smart move. They need all the help they can get.
During the meeting, Lieutenant Barrett lays out his theory. He thinks George is the real stalker, and he's using Fred as a scapegoat.
Whoa, that's a big twist.
Right. But Detective Davis points out that they still need evidence to arrest George.
They can't just go on a hunch.
No, so while they're trying to figure that out, Cathy's at home trying to relax after her bike ride. But then she starts getting these creepy phone calls.
Oh no, that's terrifying.
One of them is even from George, begging her to let him come over and protect her.
Ugh, he's so manipulative.
I know, right? And then there's this call from a distorted voice threatening her and telling her not to call the cops.
That's chilling. It's like a nightmare.
Totally. She's terrified. She checks all the locks, tries to calm down, and then, bang, there's this loud noise at the door.
Oh my God, this is too much.
She looks through the peephole, but there's no one there. But just as she's about to call for help, the door bursts open,
Don't leave me hanging.
and she comes face to face with Fred Stetson.
Fred? So it was him all along.
Well, that's what it looks like. But remember, this is a screenplay. Nothing is ever that simple.
True. I can't wait to see what happens next. This is intense.
Me too.
Man, that ending to part 1, huh? Talk about a cliffhanger. Like, is Fred working alone or is George pulling the strings somehow? It's like they're messing with us.
I know, right? So much suspense. Where do we even go from here? We've got this attack, the cops are scrambling, and Cathy's caught in the middle of it all.
Well, this is where things get interesting. We shift gears a little bit.
Okay, how so?
Well, we move away from like all the external stuff, the investigation and all that, and we start to focus more on what's going on inside the characters' heads.
So we're getting deeper into the psychology of it all.
Exactly, especially with Cathy and George. Like, how are they dealing with this trauma? How is it affecting them?
Okay, that makes sense. So let's start with Cathy. We see her working with this social worker, Ann Baxter, who specializes in helping stalking victims. What's that like for her?
Well, it's pretty intense. I mean, Cathy's therapy sessions with Anne, they're raw. You know, it's not just about getting over the physical injuries. It's about rebuilding trust, feeling safe again.
Yeah, that must be so difficult. Like, how do you even begin to heal from something like that?
Right. And Anne, she's really good with Cathy. Like, she lets her express her fear, her anger without judgment. And she gives her these practical rules to cope with the anxiety and the trauma.
So it's not a quick fix.
No, definitely not. It's a long process. But having someone like Anne who understands what she's going through, that's huge.
For sure. But it seems like Cathy's also finding the support group a little, I don't know, limiting.
Yeah, she does get frustrated with it. Like, they focus so much on these passive safety measures, you know, and she wants to be more proactive. She wants to take control.
She doesn't want to just be reacting to the stalker. She wants to fight back.
Exactly. And that's a big shift for her. You know, it's like she's realizing that she can't just rely on other people to keep her safe. She has to find her own strength.
She's becoming more empowered.
Right. She's not a victim anymore. She's a survivor.
I like that. But while Cathy's finding his strength, George is still out there, lurking in the shadows.
Oh yeah, he's not going anywhere. And the cops are still focused on Fred, who's now a fugitive.
So George is free to keep manipulating everyone.
Yep. And the screenplay is a really cool thing here. It contrasts these two storylines. The investigation, which is getting more and more chaotic, and George's inner world, which is becoming more and more detached from reality.
It's like two different worlds colliding.
Exactly. And it's scary because while the cops are looking for clues, George is operating on a whole other level. He's in this world of obsession and delusion.
So he's even more dangerous because he's not playing by the same rules.
Right. And get this, he starts putting elements of the stalking into his own screenplay.
Woo, hold on. He's writing about what he's doing.
Yeah, it's messed up, right? It's like he's blurring the lines between fiction and reality. He's rewriting the story to make himself the hero and Cathy the damsel in distress.
He's trying to control the narrative.
Exactly. And he even imagines this scene where he pescues Cathy from Fred, which is creepy because it kind of foreshadows the actual attack.
It's like he's manifesting his own twisted fantasy.
Yeah, and it shows how warped his thinking is. He can't even tell the difference between what's real and what's in his head.
So while George is lost in his fictional world, what's going on with the actual investigation? Are the cops getting any closer to the truth?
Not really. They're kind of spinning their wheels. They interviewed George, and of course, he managed to convince them he's innocent.
He's such a good liar.
He knows how to play the game, but there is one person who's starting to see through his act. Detective Davis.
She's the one who's had those doubts all along, right?
Yeah. She's got good instincts. She's noticing these inconsistencies in George's story, these little things that just don't add up.
Like what?
Well, his body language, the way he phrases things, she's starting to see a pattern of manipulation.
It's like she's putting together a puzzle, but some of the pieces are missing.
Right, and she's not the only one who's suspicious. Shelley Watts, the writer who's friends with George, she's also starting to have doubts.
Okay, so we've got Detective Davis and Shelley Watts both seeing through George's facade. What about his psychiatrist, Emily Goldstick? She's the one spending all this time with him.
Right, Emily's in a tough spot. Like, she wants to help George, but she's also seeing how dangerous he can be.
So she's stuck between her duty as a therapist and her concern for Cathy's safety.
Exactly, and her sessions with George are really insightful. She tries to reason with him to show him how destructive his actions are.
But he's not listening.
Nope. He's so caught up in his own world that nothing seems to get through to him. It's like he's built this wall around himself, made of denial and justification.
So what happens next? Does George just keep getting worse?
Well, yeah, things definitely escalate. His obsession with Cathy gets stronger, and his behavior gets more erratic and unpredictable.
Like what? What does he do?
He starts following her more openly, leaving her gifts, sending her messages. And the messages get kind of threatening, you know?
So he's really ramping up the fear factor.
Right. And Cathy, she's smart. She knows she's in danger.
So what does she do?
She starts taking steps to protect herself. She changes her routines, avoids places where she knows George might be, and she leans on her friends and family for support.
She's trying to build a safety net.
Exactly. And it shows how strong she is. She's not letting fear paralyze her.
She's fighting back.
Exactly. But the question is, can she really escape him?
Yeah, George seems pretty determined.
Oh, he's relentless. He sees Cathy's attempts to get away as a challenge. Like it's all a game to him. And he's not going to lose.
So this is where the screenplay starts building towards the climax.
Yep. We've got Cathy fighting for her life, George spiraling out of control, and the cops struggling to keep up.
It's a recipe for disaster.
It's going to be intense.
So we've got Cathy fighting for her life, George losing it, and the cops are still trying to figure out what's real and what's not. Where do we go from here?
Well, the screenplay kind of circles back to the police investigation, but things aren't going so well. Lieutenant Barrett is really feeling the pressure to solve this case, but his team's struggling. They're getting bogged down in all the twists and turns, and the communication is just falling apart.
So it's like the investigation itself is mirroring the whole obsession and control thing that's going on in the story.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Like everyone's trying to control something, you know? George is trying to control Cathy. The police are trying to control the investigation. Even Fred's trying to control what he thinks is his. And in all that struggling, things get messy. Like Lieutenant Barrett, he's so focused on solving the case that he starts crossing lines.
What do you mean?
Well, he gets so fixated on Fred, like Fred's the key to everything, that he starts ignoring evidence that might point to George.
So it's like he's blind to anything that doesn't fit his theory.
Exactly. And George, he's using that to his advantage. He's like always a step ahead.
He's playing chess while everyone else is playing checkers.
Right. He's planting false clues, manipulating people, and using his, nice guy act to throw everyone off his scent.
And while he's doing all that, he's also tightening his grip on Cathy, making sure she's isolated and dependent on him.
It's classic abuser behavior.
Break her down, make her believe she needs him.
Exactly. And Cathy, she's strong, but it's taking a toll. All this fear and uncertainty, always feeling like she's being watched.
It's exhaust her.
Totally. And it makes it hard to trust anyone. She's always wondering who might be part of George's plan.
It's heartbreaking. She's trying to move on, but he just won't let her go.
And as we get closer to the climax of the story, that psychological torture just gets worse.
So how does it all come to a head?
Well, the screenplay builds to this really tense scene at a bar. Cathy's meeting a friend, right? A normal, everyday thing. But of course, George shows up.
Oh, he always knows where she is.
Right. And he tries to play it cool, like he's just concerned about her. But she can see right through him. She recognizes the manipulation, the threats hiding behind his words.
So she stands up to him.
She does. She refuses to play his game, which is a huge step for her. She's choosing to confront her fear, even though it puts her in a more vulnerable position.
Yeah, because rejecting him like that, it challenges his control. And we know he doesn't like that.
Nope, not one bit. He sees it as a personal attack, like she's defying him. And meanwhile, Fred, he's still out there on the run, and he's getting more and more paranoid.
So both of them are losing it in their own way.
Yeah, it's like they're feeding off each other's craziness. Fred's convinced that Cathy's in love with him, and George is the only one stopping them from being together.
It's a recipe for disaster. So what happens? How does it all come crashing down?
Well, the climax happens on this dark and stormy night. Classic thriller stuff, right? Cathy's home alone, trying to relax. The power goes out.
Oh, no.
Yeah, she's in total darkness, completely isolated. And then she starts hearing noises like glass breaking. Someone's trying to get in.
Ugh, I can't even imagine how terrifying that would be.
It's a nightmare. And the screenplay does a really great job with the sensory details, the darkness, the storm, the sounds. It's like you're right there with her, feeling the terror.
So what does she do?
She tries to call for help, but the phone lines are dead. She's totally trapped.
This is so intense.
And then she hears footsteps coming closer. The door to her bedroom opens and someone steps inside.
Who is it?
It's George.
George. So it wasn't Fred after all.
Nope, it was George the whole time. He's the one who's been tormenting her, pretending to be her protector.
That's messed up.
It's a total mind game, and it shows just how manipulative he is.
So what happens next? Do they fight?
Cathy knows she's in trouble. She's trapped with this guy who's been terrorizing her, and she's ready to fight for her life.
I'm on the edge of my seat. Does she make it?
Well, the screenplay leaves it kind of open-ended. We hear the sounds of a struggle, screams, and then silence. We don't know for sure what happens.
Whoa, that's a bold choice.
It is, and it leaves you with this really unsettling feeling like, did she escape? Is she okay?
It makes you think.
That's what's so great about this screenplay. It doesn't give you all the answers. It makes you confront the dark side of human nature, the obsession, the manipulation. It's a wild ride.
It really is. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the EX, what are some key takeaways you hope our listener will remember?
Well, first off, I think it's a reminder that obsession can be really dangerous. It can twist your thinking, make you do things you never thought you were capable of.
Yeah, it's like a cautionary tale.
Exactly. And it also shows how important it is to pay attention to those red flags, the manipulation, the controlling behavior. And if you see those things, don't be afraid to speak up, to set boundaries, to get help.
And don't forget, sometimes the people we think are the good guys, the protectors, are actually the ones we need to be most careful of.
Truth. And lastly, I think this story highlights how important it is to support victims of stalking. Listen to them, believe them, and don't judge them.
That's so important.
It is, because everyone deserves to feel safe and respected.
This has been an amazing deep dive. Thanks for guiding us through this crazy story.
My pleasure.
And to our listener, thanks for joining us. We hope you learned something from this deep dive into the S. Stay safe out there.